In this lesson, I'm going to walk you through how to conduct a background check for candidates the right way. I'm talking about how to abide by the state laws and the federal laws. Let's get into it. The first thing we need to focus on is what is called a criminal history background. Obviously, this is typical in most workplaces, agencies. In fact, when you're looking to work for a big hospital, if you're a nurse, you're familiar with this whole process. So, depending on the state, there are really two main ways that employers conduct criminal history background. The first is they actually call upon the references that are given. So, the cons are that the background check is not going to be as detailed as you want it to. If an employee is coming from another agency and you're looking to hire them into your own agency, then you just have to rely on the fact that if they were good enough to work for that competitor agency, it means that they're most likely going to be good enough to work for you. So in this case, this is the method that we highly recommend you should deploy in conducting background checks because it's free, it's easy, and it's quick. It's as simple as contacting a former employer and contacting one or two references. Easy peasy. It takes you about an hour tops, and you don't have to pay for anything. We highly recommend this method. The second method is usually done by the bigger establishments like the nursing homes, the hospitals. What they do is they contact the state. Every state has a different database, right? Which links to the FBI or local state criminal records. And what they do is they will give you that information, but you would have to pay for it. So depending on the state, I know for New York State, when we did it, we had to pay $60 per record. And in order for you to get that information, obviously you need a written and signed consent from the candidate. So you have to get it in writing from the candidate and then submit that over to the state. For New York State, it costs us $60. And depending on what state, Georgia, it's $15. And different states, obviously, the rates are going to be different there. If you choose to go that route, it's as simple as Googling your state criminal history background check, something of the sort on Google. And then you're going to see your .gov website, and then just search on your .gov website for the resources. Like I said, it varies state by state. That second option, in our opinion, is not ideal simply because it's time consuming and you're going to scare off the good candidates. Remember, you're competing with a lot of agencies out there, and you want to be able to get that candidate as quickly as possible and onboard them to start working for you as quickly as possible. So option number one, which is just calling the former employer, is the most ideal and the fastest. One thing to note, yes, there are companies like TruthFinder or PeopleFinder that are third-party platforms out there, but by law, you're not allowed to use those to make a decision on whether you're going to hire somebody or not. So even if you go to truthfinder.com website, you will notice that they have a disclaimer there that says you cannot conduct pre-employment background checks or decide on promotion, demotions, reassignment, retention, or termination of an employee based on the information you find from there. So our opinion is don't even bother using third-party platforms. Use the calling, the old school method. Faster, cheaper, gets you to your point as quickly as possible. Next comes drug and medical screening. By law, there is information that you are allowed to collect from as an individual, specifically medical records. If you recall in our previous lesson, there in the policy and procedure manual, there is information in there that talks about the guidelines to collecting somebody's medical history and medical background information to protect both the candidate and yourself from being sued. The candidate is being protected by the laws that exist so that you are not discriminating somebody because, for instance, they have diabetes, because diabetes is not contagious, right? And But what is contagious is tuberculosis, which is TB. Tuberculosis is highly contagious and it's an airborne disease. So it makes sense for you to have your candidate tested for TB. And you can also disclose to your clients that your caregivers are already pre-screened for things like TB and standard COVID test. I highly recommend you keep it only to those two tests. And for the COVID test, obviously that's free. No matter what state you are, there are free testing facilities in every state, so you don't have to pay for that. The TB test, however, that test costs money. So all you have to do is instruct your caregiver to go to the local CVS and ask for a TB test and get that receipt sent over to you after they've gotten the TB test. And what you're going to do is you're going to reimburse that candidate for that expense. If the test costs, let's say $59, the candidate goes to CVS, gets the TB test, gets the receipt, make sure they take a photo of the receipt, shows you that receipt, and then you reimburse them for that $59, whether it's through a check or in payroll at some point. So make sure you're disclosing that when you're onboarding a caregiver as well. Additionally, most companies, especially the ones that are still doing things the old school way, they even go a step further and do things like drug screening for marijuana or crack or any heroin, all these crazy things. We don't recommend you do a drug screening. In fact, you're going to be relying on caregivers that are going to be coming from competitors, right? We don't recommend you do a drug screening simply because it's just going to delay the amount of time that you're going to onboard a caregiver. However, you can always tell during the interview process whether somebody's on drugs or not. If you see somebody tweaking or twitching and they're not focused, just know they got some substance abuse issue. So it's easy for you to notice those things during the interview process. And if they're coming from a competitor and you're recruiting that person from another company, then you have to trust that they're responsible and they're not a drug addict, at least. So that's what we highly recommend. Don't bother with the drug screening because it's going to delay the amount of time you're going to get your caregivers. So definitely skip that process. Leave that to the bigger hospitals and companies that are out there, like the major big nursing homes. Leave that up to them to do the screening for you. Okay? So that's what we highly recommend for the drug screening. This one right here is a bonus, and I talked about how to onboard your caregivers already. Another bonus that you need to seriously consider, mailing out a PPE package. What this means is that you will have a set of scrubs, some gloves, hand sanitizer, and throwing some Crocs in there, and some masks, and ship that over to your caregiver as a welcome package. It's just a gesture of goodwill on your part and makes the employer excited to start this journey with you, because remember, you're competing with other agencies that are not even going to do anything remotely close to this. So seriously consider mailing out a care package for PPE to your caregivers. And let's say this package costs you about $100, then consider that $100 worth spending, because that caregiver is going to remember that. And they're going to stick around because they'll sense that you actually care about their well-being and their safety on the job. I hope you got some value from this lesson, and I'll see you in the next lesson.